Okay, it's time to make a new video in the new year. First one for this year, so Happy New Year to everybody if you're celebrating. And I thought I'd begin with a rather important subject which I have spoken about before. So as you saw by the title, our natural creative genius is stifled from the time we are born. It's an article that I've actually read maybe 6-8 months ago to you, but it's been slightly updated, so I'll read it again. It's important because the title, the whole title of the article reads as follows: we are born creative geniuses and the education system dumbs us down, according to NASA scientists. Yeah? So this was done, a study by NASA. So, you know, if it says NASA, it must be true. But I can vouch for you that this is true, that the education system stifles our creative genius. I remember myself when I was a kid, I hated school. I hated school because it didn't allow me to be creative. If you're an artist, a writer, a poet, any kind of artist really, you won't find answers in the education system. You have to find the answers, the inspiration within yourself. You have to find the time, you have to find the courage to go out on a limb and just see what happens. And this we're not allowed in our education system. You only have a copy and paste system. The system is designed so that you remember, and whoever remembers best is rewarded for the ability to remember best, if you like. There's no individuality. There's no input from your own creative abilities, but simply reading and remembering. This is called learning. And there's another there's another way of gaining consciousness, if you like, because we're talking about consciousness, is wisdom beyond learning. I'll read you a little bit of my article that I wrote as well years ago, but first I'll go through this important article, and it begins as such: our natural creative genius is stowed from the time we are born. That's right. At TEDxTucson, Dr. George Land dropped a bombshell when he told his audience about the shocking result of a creativity test developed for NASA but subsequently used to test school children. NASA had contacted Dr. George Land and Beth Jarman to develop a highly specialized test that would give them the means to effectively measure the creative potential of NASA's rocket scientists and engineers. The test turned out to be very successful for NASA's purposes, but the scientists were left with a few questions. Where does creativity come from? Are some people born with it, or is it learned, or does it come from our experience? Yeah. The scientists then gave the test to 1,600 children, 1,600 children between the ages of 4 and 5. What they found shocked them. This is a test that looks at the ability to come up with new, different and innovative ideas to problems. What percentage of those children do you think fell in the genius category or imagination? It's not only imagination, it's actually your intuition that gives you the inspiration and the problem-solving ability and the answers. But let's go with imagination here. A full 98% of kids between 4 and 5 had the genius in them. The genius in old ancient Rome, a genius was actually called, your own inner self was called a genius. Yeah, they had a personal genius and a family genius, and so the genius, the word genius is taken from that, but it meant in our old in our old history, a genius was referring to your inner self, to your inner, and the core of the inner self, like I said so many times, is intuition. Yeah. So a full 98% of the kids had the genius. They had the ability to solve the problems, you know, creatively on their own. They didn't need to look outside of themselves to education or Google it or to ask the authority or ask the you know, society and its institutions. You didn't need that. You just did it yourself, and it worked. Okay, the article continues. It gets more interesting, but this is not the real story. The scientists were so astonished that they decided to make it a longitudinal study and tested the children again 5 years later when they were 10 years old. When the kids were tested, the result, only 30% of the children now fell in the genius category of imagination. So in 5 years of education, in 5 years of being brainwashed, if you like, 30%. So 2/3 are gone. 2/3 of your genius, of your contact with the inner self, of your intuition is gone. I call it the intuitive imagination. That's gone by the time you're 10 years old. So what happens when you're 15-year-old? The article continues. When the kids were tested at 15 years, the figure had dropped to 10 to 12%. So even less than half of the 30%. So 12%, that's nothing. Just a few kids, yeah? And what about us adults? The article continues. How many of us are still in contact with our creative genius after years of schooling? Sadly, only 2%. 2. Can you imagine just 2%? No one, hardly anyone is in touch with their inner genius, with the genius. Yeah? This is a terrible situation in our society. And this is one of the most important things that we need to talk about and tackle every time I do my videos, every time I post on social media, write an article, I go back to this problem. And I call it the difference between the masculine and the feminine. The feminine is the genius, the intuition, the intuitive imagination that gives you the ability to be free from this conditioning, from this brainwashing. And this is what it's called redemption. This is why Jesus came in the first place. I might do a video about this. He came to free us from this. He came to free us from the Old Testament rules and laws. In other words, from society, from the learning, from the education system, from society that is imprinting itself, its own narrative on you. And that's why he was murdered. You know, he came to save us from this. Jesus came to save us from the law, from this. Okay, so the article continues. So how many adults? Sadly, only 2% are left. And for those who question the consistency of these results or think they might be isolated incidents, these results have actually been applicated more than 1 million times, reports Gavin Noscrimento, whose article first alerted me to this amazing study and its shocking implication that the school system, our education system, robs us of our creative genius. The reasoning for this is not too difficult to apprehend. School, as we plainly call it, is an institution that has historically been put in place to ultimately serve the wants of the ruling class, not the common people. In order for the so-called elite to maintain the lavish lifestyle of over-luxury, where they contribute the least but enjoy the most, they understand that children must be dumbed down and brainwashed to accept and even serve the rapacious system of artificial scarcity, unending exploitation and incessant war, writes Nascimento. This is in the article. What now? Can we recapture our creativity? Actually, before I keep reading, I'll give you a quote that is attributed to Osho. I don't know whether Osho said this. I don't read Osho. I've never read Osho or met him. But anyway, this is what it says. No society wants you to become wise. It is against the investment of all societies. If people are wise, they cannot be exploited. And wisdom If you have been reading me or listening to me, wisdom is this feminine mystery of intuition. Wisdom means Sophia. If you're familiar with some mythology or some depth psychology, if you're familiar with any of this work that I'm doing, there are so many other people, usually women, that are actually working on this. Sophia means wisdom, and Sophia is a goddess. She's an image of a woman, and she's the image of intuition that gives you direct access to your solutions that you need. And this is, like I said so many times before, this is what it means by redemption. Jesus came to redeem us from this system, repressive system, that you have to remember. And the better you remember, the more you're rewarded. Yeah? So I come as well with a message to you. You don't need to remember this. You need to just simply look inward within yourself, find your inner genius, and then working together with your inner genius, it will begin the process of redeeming you out of all this. And what does that mean by redemption? Finding the center where the genius dwells and then listening to its instructions, having a dialogue with it. You know, an open dialogue, a conversation between you and your inner genius. And then it begins the process of freeing you from this. This is what is known by the jail. Many mystic poets speak and write about this. Freeing you from the jail. Rumi speaks about it all the time. Yeah. Why are you standing there when the doors of the jail are open? In other words, look within you, trust those hunches, trust your inspiration, trust your intuition, and it will free you. It freed me 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. I still remember the date when I left the system, and I never really went back. For a little bit, for here and there, when I needed to get some money and so on. At that time, I went back and worked for 6 months here, 2 months there, and so on, in a full-time job, but never permanently went back to full-time job. Your inner genius will look after you as well. I've made videos about this. When you're desperate, when you need money, when you need to pay bills and so on, something will happen and you'll have it. Something will come up and suddenly, like a miracle, you will have the money that you need. You know, I've told you the story of my friend. She was desperate. She had 3 kids. She would walk past a place for gambling. I forget the name now. For lotto, buying lotto tickets and buying, betting on horses and so on. TAB, T-A-B in Australia, it's called TAB. And a voice inside her head said, go and buy a ticket. It wasn't the ticket for gambling on horses and so on, for winning the races, but just a lotto ticket. And she would win just enough to tie her over to pay her the bills. How can you explain this? You can't. But she trusted her inner voice. She trusted the inner genius. And it worked. And it works for me as well. I've write in my book, Where We Dream the Single Dream. I was desperate. I was in Stockholm, stuck in Stockholm during a festival. There was no one wanted to have the walls painted. That's what I did for a living, painting frescoes on walls, because everyone's busy, all restaurants too busy. It's festival, too many customers. I was desperate. I had one last night money left for one more night sleeping in a hostel. Otherwise, I would have had to slept on my backpack. Usually, but I did actually one night slept in a park behind the hostel and in a train station, central train station. But I had one night left, and the next night, the following night, I went back to the hotel when I still had the bed, and I met someone, and one thing led to another, one thing led to another. I had a job, and I had enough money to actually not only buy myself bed for a few nights, but actually had enough money to return to Australia and do my studies. So I can communicate to you now. It's not so much the studies that remembering the facts, reading book from cover, but having stories and things, to understand, so I can support my own findings, my own inner geniuses, revelations to me with stories from culture, from mythology especially. Yeah, so that's what it was meant by studies. Okay. So this is what he writes. It says, in order to so-called elites to maintain the lavish lifestyle of over luxury, where they contribute the least but enjoy the most, they understand that children must be dumbed down and brainwashed to accept and even serve the rapacious system of artificial scarcity, unending exploitation and incessant war, writes Nascimento. What now? Can we recuperate our creativity? Lenz says we have the ability to be at the 90%, 98% if we want to, from what they found from the studies with children and from brains work. These are two kinds of thinking that take place in the brain. Both are different parts of the brain, and it's a totally different kind of paradigm in the sense of how it forms something in our minds. And it's called divergent. That's imagination. Again, I'm not just, this is not just imagination, this is intuition, but they call it imagination. And I'll go back to explain to you these two parts of the brain. Used to generating new possibilities. The other is called convergent. That's when you're making a judgment, you're making a decision, you're testing something, you're criticizing, you're evaluating. Now, this what they mean by divergent, they mean your intuitive part. So this is the creative part, the right side of the brain. And the convergent, what they mean is the rational, the masculine half. So, which is your intellect, the learning, the institutions, the education system. That's here. And this is the missing part, the right side, excuse me. This is the intuitive part. This is the feminine part, and the masculine, the rational, is your left side, the institutional, if you like. This is the one that you are supposed to develop. They insist that you develop, but so you can forget about the right side. Yeah. So divergent thinking works like accelerate. So divergent thinking works like an accelerator, and convergent thinking puts a brake on our best efforts. We found that what happens to these children as we educate them, we teach them to do both kinds of thinking at the same time, says Land. When someone asks you to come up with new ideas, as you come up with them, what you mostly learn at school is so immediately look and see. We tried that before. That's dumb idea. It won't work, and so forth. This is the point, and this is what we must stop doing. When we're actually looking inside the brain, we find that neurons are fighting each other and actually diminishing the power of the brain because we're constantly judging, criticizing, and censoring, says Land. If we operate under fear, we use a smaller part of the brain, but when we use creative thinking, the brain just lights up. It's not only fear, it's like I said, it's the brainwashing, because what it is we are taught from, like, the article says, from 5 years old, you're taught to remember. You're not taught to actually look inward, to focus on your intuition, on your inner genius. That's not allowed. That's why the church persecuted first the pagans and later the carriers of the feminine, like witches, because they still had their own contact with nature. Now, in other words, they didn't need the church to be in contact with their own feminine intuition. They didn't need the church to be in contact with the divine. They had their own intuitive connection to the divinity, through their own rites, through their own whatever ways that they learned with working with herbs, working with dreams, working with intuition, this is all feminine. And that's why the church was eradicating this, because you're not allowed to go past the church. The church had a monopoly on revelation. So everything I am saying to you is about revelation. And that's what Jesus came to free us. This is the season of Christmas. We've just had that. In Orthodox, this is just the Christmas is just about to happen. What's the day? Yeah, I think on the 7th of January. And we in the western part of the world, the Catholic Church, we've already celebrated on the 25th. But the birth of Jesus means the birth of the Redeemer, right? And the Redeemer comes to redeem you from this, from societies and its institutions to control you. so that you can finally be free by looking and making contact with your own inner genius. And once you do, it will begin to redeem you, free you from all of this. Yeah, that was the whole purpose, to free, when Jesus came, to free us from Old Testament and its rules and laws. Because you read the Old Testament, it's just rules and laws everywhere. You got to do this, you got to eat this, you can't eat that, you have to wear this, you can't wear that, you have to pray on this day, you can't pray on that day. Yeah. And it's separation. It has to do with tribes. That this tribe is chosen tribe, this tribe is not. So it created these rules and laws and separatism. You know, they were the superior people and they were the inferior people. We still have this to this day. The mind, the rational mind, the left side, the institutions, the education system divides us into the haves and the have-nots. And it dumbs us down. So this is what is so important to realize, that once, if you can let go, we call it in spirituality, this is called letting go of the ego, so that you can going past yourself, getting out of your own way, and then something takes over and you follow, and you follow. And it's the more you learn to trust this inner voice, this inner happening, this inner event in your dreams. You know, a lot of my information comes in dreams to this day. But a lot of it, a big majority of it comes through intuition. Lots of it comes through intuition. The art comes into intuition. The books, what I write on internet, comes through intuition, by being centered. Yeah, and then especially the little poetry, like the one-liners and two-liners. That's how you recognize when it's genuine wisdom. It's always fresh and never secondhand. It comes to you in a moment of a flash, over clarity. Bang, and there you have it. You got it. That's it. It's not complicated. It's just a matter of believing, trusting that it's that answer, that what you were looking for, that it's guiding you. There's inner guidance. Your inner genius is talking to you. Yeah. So what is the solution? We need to find that 5-year-old again. That capability that we, as a 5-year-old, possessed, never goes away. That is something you exercise every day when you're dreaming. That I just said about dreaming. Yeah? Land reminds us. How did you go about finding that 5-year-old? How do you go about finding that 5-year-old? Land challenges us all. Tomorrow you take a table fork, tune your 5-year-old on, and come up with 25 or 30 ideas on how to improve on the table fork. If you like, you can, how to improve on the table fork. Or you can ask other questions. You can ask any questions you like. And the answer will be in your dreams. I have given you so many examples in my talks and in my essays and in my posts on social media, how that works. Remember my dream when I wanted to know my future? I didn't know what was in store for me because my whole life at that time, when I was living in Perth, just before I got out of the system, that was 93. I got out of the system in 94, and I had a dream of goddess Isis coming to see me, standing on the edge of the river, calling out to me while I was in the river up to my knees in the water. And then she took me by the hand and underwater like a fish, she pulled me through to this huge rotating vortex, equal parts white and black, and I had to squeeze through the center. How difficult it was for me to squeeze through the center when I popped out and eventually popped out on the other side. I didn't understand what was going on. When I had that dream, it frightened the crap out of me, and I woke up breathing heavily, wet from sweat, because I thought I'm going to die. It took me years to understand, but I understood that the whole purpose of one's life is to go through the center, through this tunnel, if you like, that she was pulling me through, right through the center, so that you can it's called ascend, or you can go deeper. I call it deeper. You're going inward and then deeper inward to the level of the collective unconscious, to the mythological level. Why? Because that's where we go to recover our soul, that genius, that inner, which is our divine part. And I've given you so many different dreams about this, how I went there and what I saw. The tree, the cave dream with the tree, with the water, with the stream bubbling up from the roots of the tree, and the feminine, the woman, this transparent white woman taking a cup. You know, there's the grail, and she gave it to me, and she said, drink, because this is where many men of old found their gold. You know, she's speaking in poetry. This is intuition. She says, you know, you found your intuition, you found your genius. Now drink from here. You know, pay attention to your inner voice and stay with it. It will help you throughout your whole life. It will help you to redeem you. Another dream, this is me again, you know, dreaming, I don't know how many years ago. I am somewhere in the backyard where my grandma, when I was a kid, she used to grow, we had all the vegetables, cabbage, and there were fruit and potatoes and everything. She had a backyard, she had a bit of land, and that's where we had trees, apple trees, pear trees, and so on. And at the front, the entrance to the backyard, to that land, we had. She also had always tomatoes, and the tomatoes were ready to pick. So this is when when your intuition is ready, you can eat it. That's what this means. This is a fruit of the tree of life. And there I was, and a voice came to me, Marek, come. Come, it's time. So this little, it wasn't a boy, I can't remember. It was a little, like a little dwarf, took me by the hand, took me onto a shore, and there was waiting another woman, a magical woman, a feminine figure. She looked at me, she took me onto a ship, and we were going to sail across the sea to a place, and she says, now I can begin redeeming you. And that's redemption, to the center where you can find your own, the genius is there. That's the one that's guiding me, guiding you, you know, always. He's always there. But the consciousness, recognition of it as yourself, as your divine part, that's part of the redemption. And then you're staying with it. In one foot in this reality, the other firmly rooted in the other, in the collective unconscious. Yeah? In that sometimes people call it the Akashic records, or the eternal dimension, or afterlife, or realm of the spirit. This is what I mean. This is the mythological dimension, where we all of humanity has the same symbols, same experiences. Whether, you know, getting there by walking, or walking into a cave, or walking through a wall, walking up a sacred mountain, or by a boat, it's all the same. If you look at mythology, if you read mythology, you will find correlations and similarities in all of the myth of humanity. Always to that place of the center, always to that inner temple within which we recover the inner genius, our divine part, which then becomes our partner, a companion in everyday life, which then begins the process of redeeming us from society's putting its agenda on us, so that we live. We don't have our own life when you have this agenda on you. You're not free. You always have to do copy and paste what you're told. That's really important to understand. Yeah. Okay, I have raved enough about this. So again, this is the first video of this new year, so I wish all of you a happy new year, and I hope that you will too finally recover your own inner genius. You might experience, maybe have a mystic experience or a dream of traveling somewhere like that, into a magical place where you meet with magical person, or someone who helps you, someone who is supernatural, and starts giving you instructions, and you build a relationship with that, and it begins the process of redeeming you as well. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.